Good morning, it's Art Online with Hazel Jarvis, and today is week 2 and we're going to be going back to looking through the window. So we've already been to Venice and we've been to Bali, so I thought today we would go to Paris, and this is our inspiration image. We will do a lovely fresh painting with gauzy window drapes as if we're looking out onto the Place de Vauzage in Paris. I like to start with a quick thumbnail sketch. So I'm going to draw a rectangle for my window. I'm going to draw the buildings that we see. I'm going to draw the buildings very quickly and then we will be good to go. So this is a nice simple shape. Another rectangle, distinctive roof line, and then buildings on either side. We have a very simple sketch like this. We can add our curtains coming down the side. We're going to have railings in because they're always very decorative. Our railings, and then I like to imagine I have a person standing looking out the window, hands on the railings, and this gives me my approximate eye level. So I just do a very quick sketch, something like that, just so that I know where I'm going. I then redraw onto watercolor paper. And I try not to press too hard, and I'm going to do a light sort of fanciful sketch, so happily it doesn't have to be accurate, and we have some fairly simple shapes to work with which will help us. Once I've got the pencil line in, I then basically, I know it sounds odd, go back and erase and lighten up as much of the pencil as I can so that I don't make my watercolor too greasy or too dirty. Couple of chimneys right here for good measure and to make the skyline more interesting. I work out my color scheme, and because this is France, we're going to have a red, white and blue color scheme, and then we're going to have a lot of typical sandstone stonework, so the periwinkle, the yellow ochre and the burnt sienna. I want my painting to have a fresh and spontaneous look, hence the billowing of the gauze curtains. But I'm also, if you note, going to leave a tiny bit of white space between the sky and the building and between the other buildings so that there is a lot of air circulating and it looks very fresh. To paint the sky, I turn it upside down so that I start with the complicated part first, and I load my brush with a little bit of the French ultramarine, cobalt blue and the periwinkle, mix it together. I want a really nice swollen brush, lots of paint on it, and I start not touching my pencil line but just immediately south of it, and I paint around the chimneys so that I keep that little white area, and I just go around my building while the paint is still wet. I'm going back and forth so that I don't get a hard line. And then I'm going to reload my brush with this mix. Carefully go around the skyline. And then using this same mix, I'm just going to pull it all the way to the top of the window. Same mix of the periwinkle and the blue on my brush. I knock a little bit off and I'm going to just lightly paint in some folds in the drapery, in the curtains. So you put your brush to paper very lightly and then you press down so it gets wider and then you lift off. So brush to paper, press down, lift off. To tackle the roof up here. So that's a little bit of periwinkle but we just dirty it a tiny bit with a touch of the burnt sienna. So this goes in, painting around the window at the top. And again, you don't go right to the very edge because you're going to leave a tiny little gap of unpainted paper. With this same colour, this slightly dirtied down periwinkle, we're going to just put a little bit of an accent on top of the roof, and we're going to do a tiny bit on either side of the side buildings. Why I love painting through the window is because it gives you a natural frame, so we can just arbitrarily cut off about here and we don't even have to worry about looking down and seeing the car. Still, with my dirted periwinkle, I'm now going to paint in the surround of the windows. So nice fine brush, hopefully a good steady hand. So now we're going to do the buildings on the side. I take my periwinkle and I just dirty it down, this time with a tiny bit of number 47, the Van Dyke Brown. Make sure it's nice and pale. Mix a little bit of the yellow ochre, 44. And that gives me a lovely stone colour. So that's the periwinkle, the Van Dyke Brown, and a little bit of the yellow ochre. Quite a lot of this colour because I've got a large area of the side of the street that I want to do in this particular colour. And I don't want to run out. So now I've painted in all the architecture, and you'll notice how I'm leaving this tiny little white line between the two buildings and between the roof and the sky and between the chimney and the sky, just so that it looks nice and airy and fresh. At this point, I probably wait for a few minutes and I let the buildings dry. While the buildings are dry, so as not to waste any time, I'm going to paint in the curtain rod. So I'm going to take my nice dark brown Van Dyke Brown and I'm just going to do a line across the top, just like we did last week with a straight line, and I'm just going to draw in some rings. Next we're going to put in the window frame itself. So you'll load up with your burnt sienna, and I'm going to give it a nice decorative top. So I'm going to give it a good curve. I'm going to paint round the sides. We come to the fun part, which is the details. So grab a brush with a nice fine point and we will put in the windows. You'll remember when we looked at the sketch, we talked about where our eye level would be. The windows that are above eye level will be slanting down, and the windows that are below eye level on either side will be slanting up very slightly. Set my eye level just about where the arch is, just about right here. So you will see that I have marked in a whole series of windows. If they're above eye level, then they're going to tilt down. If they're on eye level, they're going to be straight. If they're below eye level, they will tilt up a little. Windows now look something like this. Windows to reflect the sky colour, so back to my blue and with my fine brush, I'm now going to carefully paint in some of the window panes, but not so carefully. Again, you want to leave just a little bit of white space between each one so that it looks nice and fresh. Worry if they're not all the same. Remember, you're in Paris, you're on holiday, you've just gotten up, you're looking through the window, and it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to give the illusion. I'm going to take a slightly darker brown, and sometimes I even just mix the paint on a piece of paper like this. I'm going to take a slightly darker brown and we're going to put in some architectural detail. Knock off the extra so that you get a fine point. I've added a little bit of shadow to my windows, and I've put in some windows here that you can see as if this is another building through the archway. Next of all, we're going to do the tassels. One of my favorite parts. The red of the red, white and blue. So we have our tie backs on our curtains, and I think we're going to add just a little bit of a fringe to the curtains just to make them a little pretty. I have added the tassels, which I think make a nice touch. You could leave it like this because I think this makes a lovely picture, or if you're very safety conscious, you could add a wrought iron balcony, which would be very French and very fun. Here's the image with a balcony. Here is the image without. I think I kind of like it like this, so I'm going to call it a day. This has been a great project. You practice windows, you practice architecture, you practice a little bit of drapery, and you get to imagine that you're in Paris. So time for a café au lait, and I will see you soon. Thank you so much.